Hello and welcome to Exotic Gardening UK Yorkshire Kris Weekly, and in this week's episode we'll be looking at marker plants in your local area and how we can use them to see if we can grow similar plants in our own gardens. So you join me on this absolutely freezing day. The ground is rock hard, it's been sub-zero the ground at least a week, feels like it's been sub-zero for a couple of months now, and we've had many -5, 6 and -7s, and it's really cold, and now it's very windy as well. And I'm making this video to talk about those plants that are planted in your local area and how to use them as a guide to see what can grow in your garden with or without protection in most cases. Now, if you're new to exotic gardening or you've been doing this for years, you'll know that the weather and your climate makes a major sort of part in what you can actually plant in your own garden, what will survive. We all know you can't grow edible bananas outside at these latitudes because they will simply die in winter. But how hardy are the plants that you have in your garden, and how do you know whether plants you want to buy will survive in your location? Well, it's very tricky when we talk about hardiness of plants, because very often we just say that is hardy to -5, that's hardy to -10, that's half hardy, that's fully hardy, that's proper hardy. But these mean different things to different people, and the absolute temperature is not the only thing that determines whether or not a plant is hardy. Things like duration of cold, moisture, wind, how exposed the plant is, competition it has. There's little microclimates within your garden and the part of the garden you're going to put a plant all together, sort of come together to say whether or not a plant will survive in your garden. But we can use other people's examples and mistakes to see whether or not the kind of plants you want to grow will survive in your garden. So a really good thing to do before you start buying lots of exotic and expensive plants is to have a good look around your local area, walk the local streets, look in people's front garden and see what they have growing. And there's quite a few plants to look out for. The good indicator plants to see whether or not they'll survive in their garden and your garden. So every year the DIY sheds sell thousands and thousands of borderline palms, tender palms and hardy palms. So things like Washingtonia robusta, Chamaerops humilis, Canarian date palm Phoenix, canariensis and Trachycarpus fortunei. These very common plants, along with phormiums and cordlines, are sold in their thousands every single year in the UK and similar places in Northern Europe and the USA as well. And these plants, like I said, thousands are grown, often as pot plants, as bedding, or just planted out by people who know nothing about how hard these plants are. They just put them out and hope for the best, and they're grown normally as very forced plants, and then they're sold to garden centres, DIY sheds, planted out as small plants and left to fend for themselves in most cases, unless you know what you're doing and you've researched your tropical plants. So if you go around your local area and you see that Washingtonia robusta is flourishing and you've got great big examples in your local area, you know that you can grow the same sort of plant in your garden and a full range of plants that are more hardy than Washingtonia robusta. So we're going to look at quite a few key indicator plants that are grown, like I said, across the country and sold in their thousands, but have different hardiness levels. So the first one we can look at are general bedding plants like Pelargoniums, because they're hardy down to about 0, give or take a few degrees in more sheltered locations. So if you go around your local area in winter or early spring and you see Pelargoniums still flowering, still flourishing, then you know that that plant will grow in your garden, and you can grow pretty much everything else I'm going to talk about in this video and similar plants as well. What this doesn't take into consideration is 1 year you might get a very, very mild winter, and then you get a normal winter or a hard winter where pelargoniums won't survive. So it's good to keep looking every year, looking around different gardens and see what's growing and see what survives the winter. But we'll just talk about what survived in this video through many winters at different hardiness levels. So we saw pelargoniums about 0 to -2 for short periods. If you see that growing and you see that year after year after year, and it's the same plants not being replanted, then you know you can grow those in your garden, and things like Washingtonia, robusta and all the other hardier plants. The next one we're going to look at is the tender Cordylines. So the very vibrant pinks and Torbay dazzler and things like that. Cordlines that really we say about hardy to -5, give or take, plus all the other conditions, so exposure, wind, moisture and things as well. But down to temperature, we say about -5-ish with all the other variables included. So if you see vibrant pink Cordylines growing well in your local area, and they've grown big, and Torbay dazzler's grown big, then you know you can grow quite a large range of half-hardy plants, because you grow in a location, or you garden location where these plants flourish and thrive. So we'll look at an example of that now.
Now here's an example from 2016, and this is one of the more tender types of Cordylines. So this is normally, you would expect it to survive down to about -5. Any lower than that and it can kill them off. And you can see there's one little one there, a bigger one there, and a third one here. And if we go forward just a year, you can see they have grown, a bit weeds around them, but you can see they've grown and they've survived because the last few years have been very mild. So if you see this growing in your garden, you can think, it's done okay, it might last a few years, and these haven't been protected and they've done okay, and these are still alive in 2021, so survived at least 5 years. Well, let's see what the winter does for them next, if they survive or not.
The next plant that is sold absolutely in the tens, hundreds of thousands, probably millions in the UK every year, in Europe, is the date palm. The Canary Island date palm, Phoenix canariensis. This palm is sold absolutely everywhere. Normally it's quite stretched plants that might be up to a couple of meters tall, but tiny little base of a trunk, or much smaller as bedding plants in displays. You can see these everywhere, and if you see them planted out in summer, you can't take that as a given that's going to survive the winter. So what you want to do is go around your local area in winter, see where they are, and then come spring and summer the following year, see if they're still alive. Because if they are, or if you've got big specimens that and they've been there for years in your local area, you can grow a huge range of plants, because these are pretty tender really. They're definitely not hardy in 99% of the UK. Coastal areas, yes, and inner city centres as well. But these when they're really small, they're only hardy to about -3, -4 really. When they're sort of bigger, then you're going up the hardiness. So they get down to about -6, -7, -8, they'll get damaged. -10 will kill off most Phoenix canariensis. So if you see this plant growing and surviving year after year in your local area, or see big examples, then you can grow this palm and many, many other plants that are much, much hardier than this. So it's a great one to look out for because it's so widely grown as bedding.
And here we are with another example from 2009. We have this wonderful collection of exotics, things like Cordline, Red Star, Gloriosa here, Yucca Gloriosa. I think that's a bootia there as well. We've got Formians, and we've also got this Phoenix canariensis, which is growing pretty well, and it's quite a sizable plant by this point. But again, 2010 came, and it's completely decimated the tender things. So the Phoenix booty is gone, and the Yucca's not doing so well. That one's removed. I think there's one there. That one's still alive, and the Formian's gone. Whether or not that was taken out, I'm not sure. But some Formians did die in 2010, and the red star was cut down to the ground and it just resprouted there. That's 6 years later, and if we go forward a few more years, we can see that's come back a bit, but a lot smaller than it was. And it's also the ones over here that I think were new plants. Now they were there then, and in 29, yeah, they were much taller, so they've regrown as well. So it does show you some plants can do well for years and they get a very bad winter and it cuts them down. So whether or not you class these as hardy is up to you.
The next plant I want to talk about are plants that are getting down to about minus 8-ish. So we're talking about the general green Cordline australis and also Chamaerops humilis. These plants are, in my location, we normally say they're hardy, but very bad winters will kill them off. So if you see lots of cordlines, not just small plants in little planters or bedding, but big substantial plants that are, you know, well over 2 meters, or thick trunked ones, multi-headed examples that have been there obviously 10, 15, perhaps 20 plus years, you know in your location that it's generally going to be a hardy plant that should survive for many, many years. So you can grow things like Cordline australis in your garden, and that goes for Chamaerops humilis, the European fan palm, which you normally buy very often from garden centres and sort of DIY sheds. It's tiny little plants. You can get bigger, bushier versions, but you normally get the small ones as well, sold in thousands and planted out. So if you see them in your local area, then you know down to about -8 you're pretty much fine, and they can survive when they're bigger, down to about -10 or even lower. So that's a good indicator plant for something that's about -8 to -10 range, and all the other plants that are said to be hardy down to -8, -10, you can probably try them and you should be fine in your area. So we'll have a look at an example of that now.
So here we can see some mature Cordline australis with nice thick corky trunks, multi-headed plants that are nice and tall, and some of the best specimens in my local area, or should I say were. This is 2009 when they're looking magnificent, and then we had the cold winter of 2010, and 11 and 12 weren't very warm either. And if we just move on, we can see that they've gone by 2015. Just got one that's reshooting here, the others have either died or been died and removed, and you can see they've gone. So it does show that when you have a very cold winter, that even plants which you might think is hardy, like these cordlines in this location, are not at all hardy if you get a very extremely cold, prolonged cold spell. But since then, they have survived, and up until 2018 we still had one regrowing and looking okay again. Now I couldn't find a large example of a Chamaerops humilis planted in the ground. They're often planted in pots, but I have found this one that's pretty close to me that's in the ground from 2016, and this is hardy down to about -10 or well, about -8 at a small size like this. And if we just go forward a few years, you can see it's just a bit higher than the brick wall. Go forward 3 years and it's made quite a bit of growth, but it's still a small plant because it's quite a slow growing palm. So you can see this plant is hardy so far in this location in this garden, and for me it's been hardy, well, since I started growing exotic plants for about 15 years now. I've still got the same plants in pots that have survived. So definitely my location, without any protection, they're totally hardy.
Now the last plant we're going to look at is the Trachycarpus fotuniae. This is the most widely grown hardy palm in the UK and Europe, and you get them quite small in garden centres normally, but you can get much bigger ones as well if you're willing to pay a few £100 for bigger specimens. And most people will buy them as small plants, the general population, not the people that are really interested in exotic plants, but just general gardeners will buy the small plants, plant them, and the surprise that after a few years they'll bulk up, and after 7 or 8 years they'll really shoot for the sky and get taller than your house in about 15 years or so. So if your local area has many Trachycarpus fortunei that are really large and established, or small plants that you've seen year after year slowly getting bigger, then you know that you can grow Trachycarpus fortunei in your location, because they're hardy down to about minus 15-ish. Again, we talk about the other variabilities, so you might see one die at minus 10, or you might see one survive minus 20 with a lot of protection and a lot of luck, but it's that sort of range. About minus 15 is what we say. So look for that palm, see it growing in people's gardens, and if you see that growing well, then you know you can grow it in your garden. You might not be able to grow Phoenix, but you know you can grow Trachycarpus, fotuniae, and you can grow lots of other hardy plants in that sort of range as well.
So this is an example from 2009 of Trachycarpus fotuniae, probably the hardiest palm and the easiest growing palm you can grow in the UK. And this has gone through the very bad winters of 2010, 11 and 12, 2010 being particularly awful. And you can see it was a very small plant then, so that's what, about a metre tall, something like that, hardly any trunk whatsoever. And that is 12 years ago now. If we just move forward 10 years, you can see the growth change, and now it's a full-size palm with a huge trunk there, which is basically as tall as the top of the windows there. Quite a small crown, it's probably been pruned quite a lot, but it just shows you how hard it is. It's gone through many winters, some very cold winters as well as the mild winters, and it has grown really well. And that's gone from quite a tiny plant, and over 10 years it's grown this big, and the year before it was that big. You can see it's been pruned quite a lot in the recent years, so that's a good marker for palms that are about hard down to minus 15.
So I hope you found this video interesting and also useful. Basically, I really think it's great to go around your local area, especially if you're new to this type of gardening, see what people have growing in the front gardens and look for the species we've had talked about in this video, and come back in winter, come back the next spring and summer and see if they're still there and growing well. If they are, you know you can grow them in your garden, and I hope you have lots of success growing these types of plants, because exotic plants can give you so much pleasure and give you that sort of summer feeling all year round. Well, maybe not on days like this where it's absolutely freezing, but it's great to look out and see large palm trees growing well in your garden. So thanks for watching this edition of Exotic Gardening UK Yorkshire Kris Weekly. If you have not done so, please subscribe using the buttons below, and I'll see you next time.